Very good afternoon, everybody. Thousands and thousands of apologies. We are terribly sorry. The producer's away and lots of miscommunication. We haven't had Zissa for 7 days, and then we had Solar, but that hasn't been, properly working as it should. What's the problem? What? We've now had to run a generator, and I thought that you were climate friendly.
Well, all I can say is that admin is Zia's forte, and everything that went wrong today is 100% his fault and nothing to do with me.
And it turns out he's not around, and the crew is mad. They're seething.
Yeah, well, I'm not, and they're afraid to give him an earful. They've been giving us an earful all afternoon.
Unbelievable. And this was all in front of our guest. How embarrassing.
Well, Caleb is a good friend. He's a Asimwenzi.
Yeah, understanding.
Kinda.
Yeah, I mean, you've been waiting. He was right on time, at 2:45.
Yes, I'm sure I'll get my reprise at some point. Yeah.
I think it's quite fortunate that he's not a drinker.
Yes. Well, you guys desecrated the bar last week. You had 3 teetotalers.
Yeah. I think we need to do that
from time to time.
Yeah,
once in a while. The cleansing.
Yeah, it's a cleansing process.
Oh my gosh!
But
anyway.
Today, actually, what are you having? Well, let me just finish so that I make the Malawi Shanti.
You're making a Malawi Shanti?
A Malawi Shanti.
So one of your more colorful choices.
Yeah, for our guest, because he's been very patient with us, and I think that we should reward him.
Looking forward
a quintessential Bowen pool drink.
Go for it. I've seen you make it. I don't have much hope, but let's see how it goes.
Okay, all right.
So we're wearing green today because we're celebrating St. Patrick's weekend. And so I figured Irish whiskey makes sense given the St. Patrick's weekend, and I chose the Irish Pale Ale edition. They mature it in craft beer casks, and it's Jameson is one of the better Irish whiskies, and they've been experimenting a lot with different casks for aging. I haven't actually tried the IPA edition, so this is my first time around with it, but I have very high expectations, and this should hopefully exercise the bar from last week's desecration.
Tell us a little bit about St. Patrick's and what you celebrate, or it's just purely in solidarity. It's a good excuse for you to drink some
Irish beverage.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think it's it's a wonderful, colorful tradition. St. Patrick's was a Catholic. I mean, he basically established Catholicism in Ireland during the time that Great Britain was a part of the Roman Empire, actually. There isn't really much to it apart from just the colorful festivities. It's just a celebration of their heritage and culture, of which they claim to have invented whiskey, by the way, the Irish, and they spell it differently from
everyone else.
The Scots. They spell it like the Americans with an E.
Is that a desecration in any way? Or
what, spelling it with an E?
Yeah.
No, I think it's a quirk. I think it's just, different strokes for different folks, I guess.
Caleb, do you want to try that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not bad. But I guess the teetotalers practicing, eh? I mean, of course, not the alcoholic, not the desecration across the table.
Yeah.
But nice.
Nice, huh?
Okay. No, it's good.
So today's show, we're going to do something very different. We're going to talk about startups and accelerators and just how we can get our society on startups, and if it's possible to get new industries and new companies. Is that even possible? Is that even conceivably possible, where we could wake up tomorrow, let's call it 20 years or 30 years, and we have entirely new industries and new companies and new entrepreneurs? And how do we get that going? And we know that there are pockets where this is actually happening. And this idea of a startup nation, I mean, startup, it's an idea that really encapsulates what Israel is all about. And I think a number of other nations, even Singapore or Hong Kong, even South Korea, where you get startups, or you get this fourth industrial revolution, where you get new companies and they birth new industries altogether. So that's what we want to discuss, and we thought the best person to actually talk about this is Caleb Bosher. So maybe before we go any further, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, and lots of people. So you're not Gen Z, but you are... What generation are you?
I have.
He has no idea.
He has no idea. Okay, you're a millennial.
I'm a no.
Yeah. You're a millennial. So maybe give us a bit of background, and then we can then get into the weeds. And because you've actually gone through an accelerator,
yes,
and that's something that we just want to talk about maybe a little bit later. But just give us a brief overview in a minute, so that the audience can be well acquainted with who you are.
Sure. Caleb Bosher is my name. So I run a consultancy which helps leadership, CEOs, CFOs with strategy, but focusing on financial modeling. So I do a lot of financial modeling. We have research and data. So those core areas are kind of where perhaps a lot of my what I've learned in business has kind of come from, because coming from a technical background, mostly finance. But more importantly, in 2017, because after my first job in 2017, I made a decision to join my friends to go to Cape Town for Startup Bootcamp, which is a European accelerator. So they were having their first cohort in Africa. So they were looking for 10 startups in Africa to work with. It was their first cohort. Startup Bootcamp is European. So me and two friends, we thought, let's have a shot at it, and we applied. And they thought our ideas were
And what was your idea?
So it changed. In its initial form, it was a way of having commerce happen in Africa using what Africa calls the internet, i.e. social media, like Facebook. And because our hypothesis was e-commerce will not work in Africa if it follows the same path as it has in the developed economy. The fundamentals are different when you look at, for example, how the connectivity at that time, the first world was full on the internet. Here, we even have a bespoke WhatsApp bundle, Facebook bundle. The network providers actually provide for a form of internet which is perhaps different from what would have in the developed countries. So we thought, no one is coming up with any sort of e-commerce, because at that time Facebook was not yet big with a lot of what it's doing now in the marketplace and so on. No one was coming up with a solution for e-commerce in that context. So we thought, let's build some sort of interaction. Let's figure out an interaction which would allow a business to commercialize those channels. So before there was ChatGPT, we were kind of using a simpler method to try to codify that engagement with the customer. So someone would visit a Facebook page, and then from that interaction, they would be able to check out by themselves, including using push USSD to be able to complete the payment. So that was the idea, which kind of got us into Cape Town. So, yeah.
And maybe for the benefit of the audience, just describe what an accelerator is.
So it's essentially, maybe perhaps I'll describe exactly what that program was, because maybe it can take different forms. But in that context, it was a 3-month program. So over a 3-month period, you would go into this one place, physical. So in Cape Town, there's a building called Ideas Cartel, fantastic co-working space. But what would happen is we would have experts come in various areas of business to be able to work with each of the startups, because there were 10. And we were physically in a place. And the purpose of that period was to help us build a prototype or a demo, because businesses come at different stages. So they would like you to leave in a very clear path to commercialization, and also even the product itself to develop it. So they give you, in our case, it's not a lot of money, but they gave us 15,000 euros. And basically they're like, sort yourself out, we'll give you all the infrastructure you need. So they would also get corporates to come in.
So is that living expenses, or 15,000 is outside of living expenses?
15,000 is everything. So we give you 15,000. I think they were taking 7% or 8% of equity.
Okay. So 15,000 over a 3-month period.
Yes.
But rentals in South Africa, or especially in Cape Town, are very expensive.
Oh, that's the beauty. In fact, that actually brings one of the core perhaps differences we are going to discuss in startups in general. The thinking, at least what I captured when I was there, the idea of scarcity is actually very important. How do you make do with 15,000, the three of you, in that period? And it's definitely a fascinating topic. I'm sure we'll get to it. But yeah.
No, let's get into it.
So what happens is you're given $15,000, and then you have to. So we were coming from Zimbabwe. Now the interesting thing is that time we didn't know how to incorporate in South Africa, so we had to do Mauritius. Now Mauritius is very expensive for anyone who's done Mauritius. So we had to set up in Mauritius. We used that's
a quick way of losing the $15,000.
Well, I guess so interestingly, I think interestingly, when approaching like starting a business, I think I was coming from perhaps the traditional worker type, because I think I'd worked almost 5 years in my first job. So I didn't know, I had never sold anything. So it was like I had these theoretical ideas. I'd worked with fantastic people who had raised money. So I knew a lot from that process, but I didn't know the process of actually running a startup, but also the implications of using so much money to register in Mauritius. So it was like, to be I was thinking that
school fees.
It was school fees, very expensive. So we set up in Mauritius, and then we would kind of be operating from Cape Town, and we basically lived in the office. Would leave because we're staying Green Market Square in city center at Cape Town. So basically we would wake up to work, and would sometimes go home past midnight. Cape Town is very safe, like in the CBD around that time. So that was our life.
So you found your board. Was it? Were you all staying together, or
yes?
What was happening there?
Yes, we had to stay together.
Was it a boarding house or?
No. You had to figure yourself out. Okay. So we go to Cape Town. Fortunately, thanks to Airbnb, it's quite easy. You look for a very simple place. You're like, okay, guys, you know what? It's what it is, and we make a plan. And I guess it's fantastic because I think the friends I had, one, Victor Matibiri, he was based in Australia before. So when I was coming to Zim, he had a lot of startup experience working with Australian startups. And then my other friend, Tamiswa Chipika, very smart bloke. So he's a programmer. He was coming from Canada. I think the fundamental difference is when we came, I realized later why it's important in hindsight to actually plan to go for starting businesses, because I didn't have savings. And you see, when you don't have savings and you've only had a skill of only selling what you know through a company, because I had a job and I was required, I didn't need to think of what work needed to be done. Perhaps, of course, once in a while I would think of what needed to be done, but most of the time it's someone else coming and say, okay, this is the direction, So it was my first time in that position, and kind of have to make do with very little, and it was, should I say, a very interesting experience.
Yeah, please get into the weeds, because this is very useful for a lot of our younger audience that want to start out and are looking at these accelerators and all sorts of different permutations around starting a business. So please, let's get in.
Sure. So interestingly, I think one of the things which kind of helped me to stay sane through that period is actually the clarity of the idea from my friends, because that time I wasn't highly opinionated about what I thought was a good idea, because I would spend time in the office, and then once in a while I'd spend time with them. So when we got in, my friend who was leading us, Victory, he was very clear on what he saw the opportunity as. However, of course, like all who are learning from the process of doing, because we hadn't figured that out yet, that from the point at which it's an idea to the point you reach commercialization, you only matter in the initial hypothesis, where you say this is my thinking of the world. But our fault at that time is we were not as scientific as in hindsight what we should be, meaning that when you have an idea, you actually shouldn't be emotional about the idea. You should have a very clear hypothesis of what you think the truth is. And then the process of commercialization is like you're seeking for the truth. So you say, okay, what's the process of testing which I need to do to be able to validate whether I'm right or wrong? Because there's a very high possibility.
The market will tell you.
The market has to tell you. But the thing is, for the market to tell you,
you're trying to find a product market fit.
But the process of getting to product market fit is actually more scientific. Because you have to have clarity of say, okay, what are we measuring? If in our case, we thought that commerce in that context was a problem, but the process of defining.
Well, let me just stop you there.
Sure.
You were extremely derisive of internet in Africa. You said so-called internet in Africa, which is more social media. Just to note.
Okay, I'll be polite.
Something I picked up, but please go ahead.
Well, Tinashe doesn't care much for being polite.
Yeah,
so
it's tone deaf coming from this guy.
Yeah, it's a case of the,
but anyway,
the pot calling the kettle black.
That. So, again, now if we are to look at it from the lens of it being a test, me saying that the internet in Africa is Facebook, and that's actually a test in itself. Now, the thing is, you don't consider that when you go to Cape Town, and then you have to do an accelerator in Cape Town. Cape Town is not Africa in its purest form. Everyone is connected there. So the problem of connectivity actually means something else in that context. However, we were in that context. So it's like we have to test our idea in perhaps in an area where we don't necessarily. And I'm reminded of a story of Airbnb. So when they started, Paul Graham, Y Combi, he had just set up Y Combinator. And Paul Graham was asking the founders, like, where are your users? And then they said, oh, our users, I don't remember the city, but it was like New York, for example. And then they'll say, okay, so what are you doing here? Go to your users. But the thing is we didn't get that. If you believe that your users are in a certain area, you have to do what it takes to get into that area and to prove your hypothesis, to actually test, is that the truth? And sometimes also to people can say a lot with their words about, oh, they think it's a good idea, but they have to buy. Them paying is a vote.
Demand.
Yeah, it's that is the vote ultimately, where people say, you've got something.
It's not
important.
Enough to say I want your product.
No, absolutely not. It's not enough for people to say I want your product. So that's why I personally do not believe in like giving free trials. I think you can give free trials with a very clear path to commercialization. It has to, because the problem is, as long as it doesn't cost someone, words are so cheap. So they can say, oh, this is fantastic. This is
I suppose what you're trying to say is we should not be married to our ideas.
Yes, but
we should.
Well,
because when you put out the hypothesis out there and you're trying to find out what the market is like and you're not married to it, then you can easily switch, or you can pivot and you can do whatever it takes to make sure that the market, you respond to what the market actually wants. But whereas if you're married to your idea, then you're not going to change your idea.
Yeah, it's like those Silicon Valley axioms about failing fast or move quickly and break things. Because it's I think Jeff Bezos has this way of thinking about execution, where if you wait until you're more than 70% sure before you execute, you're probably going to be late, right? So you never have the luxury of being 100% sure before you execute. There's always a significant amount of doubt.
Yeah.
And then and it's okay if you get it wrong because you pivot.
And the interesting thing, piggybacking on what you're saying, is the entrepreneur requires resilience of the idea itself. So it seems like a paradox, because you have to be resolute about what you think the problem is, but at the same time, the process of listening might actually fight the belief that you have that this is the problem.
So how do you solve the paradox? How do you reconcile?
I think the first thing is to be conscious of it. And I think what Cape Town helped me is the consciousness of you actually cannot afford, because it takes a very, like in my case, it took a very personal toll, because that process of it cost me a lot because I didn't have savings. So you either pay with time or with money. But the challenge is that the two are interchangeable. So if you spend time without actually having that objective conversation with yourself, and sometimes if you're a group, you have to speak out. You cannot be quiet. In Shona, there's a saying of say, meaning that this is a bad idea, but then you keep quiet. And the thing is,
very costly.
It's very expensive, because
from
what
everybody.
Yes. Now put it in the context where, of course, in our case, I think it played out a bit different because we were also learning. I think in hindsight, we kind of look at the experience. We're like, okay, but it was a fantastic way of changing the way we look at ideas.
So walk through the technical bit of the accelerator. So you get in, what happens the first week? This is what's happening. You are figuring out where you need to actually register the company and where to stay. Airbnb was very helpful, and your hypothesis testing your model, and what's happening in your workspaces. What's a day like?
So a typical day would be there's a program or at the start where they tell you that at this point you meet a person who's an expert in this and this and this, and then some days are purely work days, and then some days in the evening they have what they call pitch nights. One of the interesting things that we were forced to do is pitching, like learning to verbalize what you think the idea is, what you think the opportunity is. Because remember, as long as it's in your head, it's very difficult to commercialize. In fact, it's a very interesting, perhaps a side thought on that would be also why you need sometimes a team. Because sometimes, as much as someone can understand the problem from a technical perspective, the ability to articulate it is also important. And sometimes if you're a team, then you can share the burden of saying, you know what, he knows how to speak to the people, he knows how to communicate the idea and the opportunity. So we'd wake up, go to the good thing is they were giving us food. Remember, we were not the most prudent in our use of money. So we'd go there and then would basically ideate. We spend a lot of time on whiteboards to say, okay, because every startup basically has a little corner which is designated to you. It's got a little corner, and then they shared amenities. We spend a lot of time on table tennis and just Ideas Cartel. If anyone has been in Cape Town, the workspace is fantastic because the people set it up have that in mind, where they get a bunch of really smart people. And I guess it's definitely an idea for us to steal as a country, where we steal places like that and physically go to places like that to actually see how they do it.
Did you find the place, or the other guys, did you find it intellectually stimulating?
Very.
Did you find your interaction with other startups was very useful, and being around the same ecosystem was very useful? Or it's literally an echo chamber or a bubble sort, and a 3-month bubble?
So I think it's a bit of both. Mm-hmm. So you needed to, first of all, because remember, most startups fail. Many people are working on really bad ideas. So that's why it's important to spend time cutting out the bad, or at least putting a systemic process to determining what's a good idea and what's not. But interestingly, if you're in a space where people are trying to fix different problems, you'll be amazed at how much intelligence is actually embedded in people, which doesn't come out because they don't have the platform to be able to kind of share it. And the interesting thing is that we fix each other's problems. It's not as if you are having this ecosystem, you're trying to fix this problem, you're doing it by yourself. We actually fix each other's problems. I think that part was what was amazing. But also realizing, interestingly, because I was coming from corporate, and I would suit up every single day. I think I used to try my best.
Well, you're suited up right now.
That has changed.
No, but I think it's actually telling. I used to suit up. Yeah. Perhaps I would be more neatly dressed than this. But that time when I stopped wearing suits in Cape Town, because there was a gentleman, he had sold a business for I think it was $250 million, and then there were 3 of them, and they hadn't sold in Cape Town, they had sold in Europe. So he was just, Cape Town, I think we also spent a bit of time on the ecosystem in Cape Town, because I think that's quite important. So he was in Cape Town, and then he dropped by. He was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and a jacket.
My kind of guy.
I was literally the only guy who was totally suited. Now the thing is, at that time, I think also it played around with my confidence a bit, because I was like, hey, I barely survived on the 50 grand they gave us, because I was in charge of the finance. And I felt a bit ashamed to say I'm a finance director. And but that time, because the environment is a bit relaxed, it's not tense, there's no expectations of some sort of etiquette or whatever. Not that it's rude, but I guess you get what I'm trying to say. So what happens is, in an environment like that, you have people who don't have boundaries of what's possible and what's not, which then also can become an echo chamber, because you can hype each other.
You can be hippies.
You can be absolutely hippies.
But you feed off that energy.
You do, absolutely. I mean, we didn't have a problem with working generally. I think me and my 2 friends, we're not afraid of work. But it unlocked something different, because we realized that we had a very unique perspective on things, because we're coming from Zimbabwe. In 2017, things were starting to get a bit shaky. So it's almost like we were thinking of it as a ticket to the wider continent. So the way we worked was significantly different. We would leave late, and we were not afraid to do it. The challenge is what we were working on.
Okay. Alvaro, because we've got a running battle on, co-founders, whether or not it's actually a thing, or whether or not you should just go on it by yourself, and whether you should have friends as co-founders. Maybe you just want to put out your thoughts around that co-founding issue.
Look, I mean, I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other. I think if you look at the most successful companies in the world, some of them, it was just one visionary entrepreneur who built it with, and the co-founders were, the first employees, right? He didn't, or she didn't have a partner. And some of the great companies in the world, like Google, they're also famous partnerships, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. So I think I wouldn't lean one way or the other. I think sometimes if you're passionate about an idea and you've got the capacity to build something on your own, that might be the best way to go about it. And sometimes, if there's more than 2 of you who are passionate about something and are driven to build a business, maybe that's the best setup.
I'm a great believer of friends as co-founders, and I will articulate later on why I think so, but I'm more keen on hearing your thoughts on this, because you were all friends, right? You went to high school together.
Yes.
How was that working together, and do you think that contributed somewhat to your startup, or maybe you were just better off not as friends or alone? What are your thoughts?
I think when I look back at my journey, because I've gone on to then start a business where I'm basically running the business, and I have a team, but in that business, I'm running it. And I think it depends. It depends a lot with the entrepreneur. I think when there's strong opinions about direction, I don't think that's a good place to be. There must be a single vision. And sometimes the vision, yes, all of you can have the same vision, but even the implementation approach, I think, has to also be something that you agree on. In my opinion, it's important to agree upfront how you're going to deal with each other. So it could be disagreements where, for example, someone might say, look, I believe that the best route is going for this segment of the market, and someone else might be highly opinionated. The thing is, you see, both of you, because the product doesn't exist, are neither right nor wrong. Like, there's no truth in that, because all of you are assuming. However, I think that if you agree on a framework to say, if we have disagreements, we have to be able to test them. Makes sense? So if we're saying, let's say, for example, the product direction that we'd like to take is retail, and then one of us, if we were all founders, and then Tinashe says, you know what, I know retail is a good idea, but I actually think that the corporate strategy works. Now, those are two opposing, perhaps
strategy. Yeah. One is B2C, the other one is B2B.
It's B2B. But the thing is, you see, the process of validating who is correct, because it's not about who is correct, if I was to put it maybe from another.
It's two different ideas.
It's two different ideas. But to say, and we perhaps are getting maybe to the same place, but the method in which we get there matters. So I think if there is an agreement that if we have a disagreement on these things, we are going to have a systemic process of testing, and we both agree up front, then it means that at that point, because it's likely that you are more emotional at that point in the decision, so you can actually say, you know what, we are going to test this to say, is this the truth? And then this is our hypothesis. You actually do it as if you're doing science.
I think you're right on the money, and that's why I actually personally believe that you should be with your friends as co-founders, especially earlier on when you don't have money, because what you're really talking about, it's about communicating, and I think that I can only communicate with people that I already know, that I sort of understand. I know what Rufaro is like, and I know his psychology. I know when to talk to him. Talk to Rufaro on a Tuesday, you probably get better results than talking to Rufaro on a Friday, right? And also I know his mode of communicating, that if I'm arguing with Rufaro, it means that his creative juices are bubbling and he's ready to go. Yeah. If he's quiet, it's a bad sign.
Because I know
him already, right? Like, if it's quiet, with some people you might think he's quiet. So with Caleb, if Caleb is quiet, it's a good sign. But if Rufaro is quiet, it's a bad sign.
Of which you get to know that when you're friends.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Before we actually get into a business, I already know this about Rufaro. So by the time I introduce, which way should we go? Should we go B2C or B2B? If I go to Rufaro, I know that, let's have an argument. So I take him out for tea and cake on a Wednesday afternoon, and we spend 4 hours talking about it. Then I'm like, yeah, I think Rufaro, this is what he actually thinks. And then I go to Caleb, and with Caleb, I know that I'm going to say something, and it'll be 2 words, but I need to take those 2 words and know exactly what they mean and not guess. And I think if it's people you don't know, then there's that learning bit. And the learning bit, for me to understand Rufaro, it's taken 20 years.
Yeah.
So I also know his capabilities and his limitations.
And interestingly, you put it that way. So one of the things definitely which helped is us being able to have that context. I think for anyone who has started a business, whether it's worked or not, you realize that there's a famous podcast called Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman. So he speaks to all these founders. One of the things I learned in one of the podcasts is, and I could resonate with it, entrepreneurship is like swimming. So you can read about it, but nothing prepares you for water. So you can read everything about it.
About swimming.
Yeah, but about swimming. But unless you get in the water, your ideas don't
They don't count.
They don't count. And interestingly, out of the many complexities you're managing, the least you if you are friends, you've removed one of the variables in that complexity. Because what I realized through that journey, or even now, only now after a couple of years, I'm now more settled. So when things are not going well, I don't change. Like, for example, if I have a deliverable, it doesn't paralyze me, of which a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who can attest that the rent needs to be paid, the wages need to be paid, and then it paralyzes you completely. And that is not something you learn in school. So it's very, very important to work with people that you're in the midst of that complexity. At least don't be worried about.
But we all know who's high in neurotic and who's low in neurotic, and it's a better idea to start a business with somebody who's high in neurotic.
No, but you see, some of the things you find out in hindsight, though, because remember, maybe you are the
That's
one.
what I'm saying. As friends, we know who's high in neuroticism and who's low in neuroticism. We know that already. And if you're starting a business with somebody who's high in neuroticism, I'm not saying it's impossible.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there's a lot of communication and there's a lot of, and I kid you not, you're going to have to hide certain information from that person because they are they won't sleep and they start affecting everybody. But also, it's also dangerous to just in your co-founding team to have people who are just low in neuroticism. It means that you are not aware of the dangers that are out there. Because I think the good quality of somebody who is high in neuroticism is they send out the danger signal quite early on. So maybe you might put them in finance. They've got nothing to do with the product and everything. But with finance, they're in charge of the bank account. So, which is a good signal, red signal, in your startup is somebody saying, hey, I think we've run out of money. Hey, I think we need to think about it.
I think we will run out of money. You want to have that conversation before you actually run out of money.
So somebody who's high in neuroticism might actually be useful there.
Absolutely.
But you don't want them in product ideation and developing the actual product because then they just
see problems everywhere.
So here's that dynamic. It's very good to speak about it without actually being directly involved, because then the person who is like that person, so say it was me, it requires a lot of introspection for you, because sometimes the others might not,
or a psychometric and a psychology test. No, it's just like I will give you a. I mean, these are the tools that are available. Like if the three of us want to start a business, maybe the first place we need to start is to do just a psychology test, a personality test, right? So that I know what your personality is, and it will come out that actually Rufaro likes things that are on time. And the reason why this works is because none of us prefer being on time.
Oh, well, speak of the other two, like in the green shirts.
I mean, between the three of us, Ranga, you and I, if we start at 3 or if we start at 3:30, we're going to bitch about it, but the truth of the matter is we'll just get on. And yet with some people, they will go apoplectic. It's a deal breaker. What were you guys doing? And that's it. They will walk away and that's it, right? Which is also useful as you corporatize. But I think that having the conversation and communicating and knowing what your personality type is, I guess, and I like what you said, we're reducing the complexity. Because startups, it's hard business. And what we need to do early on is to reduce the complexities.
Yes.
And a lot of the complexities have to do with personality clashes, lack of communication, and big ideas, or let me say this, big ambitions but small ideas. Because I think that's actually very dangerous, where you have people who have these grandiose ideas or grandiose ambitions of what they can achieve, but when you look at the idea itself and what they're trying to address, it's really it's nothing that moves the market. And you're like, but you need to reconcile the two. And then the other thing sorry, I'm hammering down on the psychology because I think that that's what affects a lot of startups. It's projection, right? Because I've seen this working somewhere, I think it will work here. Well, that may not be necessarily true.
And I think it's more dangerous if you're younger. That's why perhaps you might need to, should I say, pay more attention to it. Because what happens is if you're not conscious of it, we are not any special or any different. So the things which affect other people will also affect you. So how those personalities, so that's where I think the difference in working, if I was to come back to why I was saying it also depends on the individual. I realized that I deal with complexity perhaps in a different way. And I found that I liked to be in charge of the direction. I had a problem with not that I have a problem with kind of following, but I realized I'm highly opinionated in a way which might not be good
if you're not the leader.
If I'm not leading. Because if I'm highly opinionated about how something should work and I'm not leading, the problem is it causes tension, which leads to the psychological issues that you are speaking of, where sometimes there is tension which has come up because
it's got nothing to do with the idea.
It has nothing to do with the idea.
But it's just personality clashes.
Absolutely.
Talk about playing to your strengths and following your passion.
So I guess it's a perfect segue into the evolution I then took from that experience. The first thing is that I'm a finance person. My core is finance. At a very young age, I knew I had an advantage in technical things. So a lot of the other interests which I developed, like programming, design, I was learning that purely just out of fascination. Now, I realized that as much as I'd gone into this venture, which was technology-based, it was more based less on my strengths. And I guess it would be interesting to also hear your stories about how those conflicts come in between what is your strength versus sometimes what is the, should I say, opportunity on hand. Because I realized that in hindsight, it might have been a different thing if I'd had that clarity early on, that my core is in finance, and I already had achieved a lot at a fairly young age to make that to demystify that. It was clear to me that if I had stayed in that
competence.
It was a core competence.
Okay.
And I think that I'll give a very interesting anecdote. So,
okay, can I differ with you?
Sure.
I actually think that your core competence is your curiosity. I don't think it's necessarily has to do with finance. I think that there are people who are perhaps even technically more sound, or people I would put in charge because I don't think your personality adheres to being counting or anything to do with the limited framework of finance. But I think that it's your curiosity, the ability to see an opportunity where no one else sees it. I think that the tools that you then use purely because that's how you were trained. Because you could have been trained in technology or in marketing or whatever.
That it wouldn't have changed the curiosity.
It wouldn't have changed the curiosity.
I think we actually land at the same place.
Okay.
But maybe perhaps from a different perspective. Because that time, I actually made a living doing animation because I was highly curious and I was obsessive. So I could say I want to learn something, and then I'll go deep into that thing, and I'll spend ungodly hours on something and become really, really good at that one thing. So I learned animation because I was so fascinated. But my theory in learning these things was, if you learn anything, you have to play at the highest level. It doesn't matter that you're in Zimbabwe. It doesn't matter. If you say you're going to do something, you have to play at the highest level. So what it involved for me is getting studios which were in America, downloading a lot of their animated videos so that I would learn what do the best do. What does it look like when it comes out well? And then basically I would work backwards to say, okay, if it looks like this. But the challenge is I realized that I will never get to the summit of animation, like globally, compared to just leveraging on what I already had. I was in finance, I was technical. So I concluded that all these other skills I had acquired or pursued would serve me in finance. So hence the, should I say, pivot back into finance, where I don't necessarily sell finance per se, because I'm like, I don't know what the solution should be, but maybe from the conversation,
it's an ocean that you could swim in.
Absolutely, absolutely.
With,
but I'd asked you,
something, because I think we've left Cape Town, and there's something I'm curious about. About the accelerator that you spent time with in Cape Town. By all accounts, you're quite impressed with the setup there and the culture and how they coached startups.
I think they were also, it was their first cohort.
Okay.
So there was a lot which maybe as I grew, I realized that they were also tweaking. So, I think setting up startups in Africa is very different from Europe. The way Africa functions is slightly different because the ground is not as clear. So for example, data. If you say that I have an idea in this area and perhaps I'm right or wrong, what you do in the first world is use data to de-risk your idea. So you'd actually research, and then there's databases all over. But I mean, case in point, Zimbabwe. So I can tell you, if I ask what the GDP is, you guys have a very different opinion from perhaps maybe the World Bank, or perhaps a IMF or the ministry. There's different perspective. But it's not a problem which is perhaps, should I say, unique to Zim. Like it's a problem.
Very good example.
Yeah. So that shows that in terms of the value of the accelerator, there were things that could be improved. But the biggest takeaway from me was really that idea that you are not necessarily correct about what you think the world is. You have to go through a discovery process, and you have to be humble enough to accept that you might not have seen it correctly. But the beauty of the process is that it's iterative. Unfortunately, they say startups don't run out of ideas; they run out of money. So,
which is true.
Yeah, of which we have a running joke amongst my friends on Econet. We say that Econet's product market fit is money, so they put in a lot of money until it works, which is different.
It's a strategy.
It's a strategy. It works. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I think about Zimbabwe, when I think about the rest of Africa, and the idea of developing, there are two schools of thought, right? There's this is how the rest of the developed world, this is the path that they took. They went through industrialization, right? But if over the last 20 years we've seen trillions of dollars of new wealth created from startups, so it's basically that, N+1 versus, 0 to 1, and I'm all for 0 to 1. And I love the idea of startups building new products that not only change the world, but create, hundreds of billions of value. And unfortunately, if you look at South Africa, notwithstanding that, startup scene in Cape Town, the growth is not fantastic. And across most of Africa, our growth is not fantastic. It looks like Silicon Valley is still, heads and shoulders above everybody else, and, maybe Tel Aviv and Berlin. So that's my question. What are we missing on the scene here? Why aren't what do we need to do differently in this part of the world to build the next unicorns and $100 billion companies?
I have a theory on this. So if you look at the developed economies, so one of the interesting scholars in this area is Joseph Schumpeter. So he speaks
This is one of our favorite economists.
Yeah. So he speaks of creative destruction. But I think one of his key ideas is the separation of the entrepreneur from the innovator. So the innovation comes into the world, but then the process of taking that innovation and commercializing it, sometimes it's the same person, but sometimes it's different people. Now, the entrepreneur's job then involves also raising sometimes the resources required. Now, the reason I bring him up is sometimes it's just to highlight how much depth they've had in in refining the ideas. And to us, I think we should be less concerned about perhaps maybe finding a new model, but rather taking those models and identifying what's different in their markets and us. One of the things is capital. So, for example, in Zimbabwe, if I was to take Zim as an example, you will find that the moment you say your startup, we can all agree that 15,000 doesn't really work like in the real world. Perhaps you need a little bit of depth, but the constraining mentally is important. But say you want to raise 200K. What's interesting is that there's a lot of companies in Zimbabwe who also want to raise 200K, but they've been operating for a very long time. So if the bank is to look at or at least the financier is to look at the opportunity, if it's $500,000, you're competing as a startup. You're competing with people who are de-risked in.
Well, they have the security. They can go to the banks.
Yes.
They've got the financial history. I think I agree with you, and I would like to take it further.
Yeah.
I think that what we're missing in Zimbabwe and in Africa, or even in Cape Town, if you want to see the missing link, because clearly the ideas are there, clearly the platforms are there, and in Zimbabwe we've got lots of accelerators, we've got lots of ideas. I think that what we are missing is perhaps what you find in Israel and what you find in Silicon Valley, which is entrepreneurial capital. So we do have capitalists, which is fair enough. But the sort of capitalists that we have in our society, especially in Africa, are people who are actually, they're looking for alpha, but not the ride of their lives. Whereas you go to Silicon Valley, you're going to get somebody who doesn't care necessarily about the return, but just wants to make this idea, go viral. They want to make an impression upon society. And if you go back into the literature of what Schumpeter says, he looks at an entrepreneur and how he distinguishes an entrepreneur from everybody else. He calls them man d'etat, man of action. They're not, and he separates them from intellectual men. That intellectual men like us like to intellectualize, almost to a fault. But man d'etat are people who just like action for the sake of action. Now, if you've got entrepreneurial capitalists, it means they love startups for the sake. They are in it for the ride. They're not in it to make money. Money is a byproduct. It's fantastic. Yeah, we make money out of it. Kudos, great. But hey, that ride, that was one heck of a ride. And I want to do it over and over again. And you need somebody with capital who's willing to take that ride.
Yes. And that's the difference, because the people who have the capacity or the willingness to the ride are they in abundance. But the ability to capacitate them is what makes the difference. And the other interesting thing about maybe a mindset shift that I strongly believe we have to take is also, if you look at, for example, how staying in Schumpeter's theory, one of the criticism of capitalism is that it will result in monopolies which are bad for society, so it causes social unrest. So, for example, Europe today, they haven't moved on from World War. So you realize that their ability to capacitate long-term or things that might cause this disruption from these crazies in the society, it's like they want to tame them. They're like, the ills of it going wrong are too high, so let's tame them. But Silicon Valley doesn't have that. So they will go all in, and they will, because it's a long game, which is also then unfortunately what we don't have. So we don't have the long-term capital, but we also are afraid of the social. It's almost
I think it's our challenge. Well, certainly in Zimbabwe, I can't speak for other parts of Africa, but what I've seen is, we abhor failure. Failures are unacceptable. So and
well, that's we were colonized by the British. We can blame the British for that.
so one of the interesting things about the Silicon Valley ecosystem and the way the venture capitalists over there do business is that they fully expect 8 to 9 of their investments to fail. Not where they don't claw back any money, where the whole thing crashes and burns. And that's okay. That's them. And can you imagine walking into a capital allocator's office in Zimbabwe and saying, I want you to fund these 10 ideas, and I think 8 to 9 of them are going to fail.
Yeah,
you're going to lose all your money.
But that's the thing. If you were to say, maybe not to a capital market, but if you were to go to an individual, you tell them that story, and you're like, but you're going to get the ride of your life. This is going to be
one of them
fun.
Is going to be the next.
No, not one of them. All 9 are going to be fun. These entrepreneurs are interesting characters. They're trying to do interesting things, and you're going to have the ride of your life. That's the story you sell in Silicon Valley. I mean, remember the story of Peter Thiel when he meets Mark Zuckerberg. He says, by the time I meet this guy, we've already decided we're going to put in money in this guy.
Yeah.
Did they use any financial analysis? Did they use any?
No models.
There were no models because and it's your pitch is half a page. That's not 5 years of financial projections.
Yeah.
But they'd already decided we're going to fund this guy. And he says the conversation entirely is this guy going to mess this up? All we want is he going to give us the ride of our lives? And Mark Zuckerberg comes in, and that's the whole idea of not wearing a suit. It's not giving a hoot. Because when you come in there, and these are billionaires, and you're worth absolutely nothing, and you tell them, guys, I'm going to give you the ride of your life.
But so if we had to kind of bring it back to Zim, I think that actually explains one of the big divides that we actually have to fix as a country, because it's very clear that if you don't have these new ideas which break the cycle, we will remain in a rut. But the thing is, to enable these new ideas, there's capacity required to be able to fund. Now you see, in an economy like, for example, South Africa, there's all levels of financing. From if you have an idea, they say friends, family, and fools. The fools part I learned from Pritchard Marco on a podcast he did. But there are people who fund you at every stage, and individuals have money, institutions have money. The challenge we have in Zimbabwe is that there is a massive gap between individuals having money and also individuals with money who are conscious of the need to play in that space. So should I call them maybe long-term rich?
No.
I actually differ.
A lot of the people with capital in Zim are defensive in their mindset.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to.
So they're not looking to make 10x their money, 100x their money. They're like, if you approach these type of individuals and you have an idea like that, they'll be like, I can just see my money.
So now can I ask you?
And they want security. And,
so it's not going to happen.
So Rufaro, can I ask you?
Yeah.
So can you say that capital is available?
No, it's not.
It's not. And that's the point. It's not.
But can I differ?
Sure.
I agree that capital is not there. I agree, but I also think that we are bucking up the wrong tree because we're trying to build financial models that then suit the kind of capital that's there. Because there is a bit of capital, and that capital is betting on companies that have a long history. But I think that what we haven't done is to make startups sexy. Hollywood makes startups sexy. People need to realize that this is this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to back you up with my money, I might lose it, but gosh, I'm going to have fun. Do you know the number of Chinese people who go into a casino and they spend, and I'm not saying that they're gamblers necessarily, but there's something acute about such minds that they can go into, because I've got a friend who works in a casino in Australia, and he's like, a guy can come with $10 million and he can blow it and he doesn't care, and he will fly back to Shanghai or Hong Kong or wherever he's coming from, and every 2 weeks he's coming in and he's just spending 10 million.
I
Just
don't
like
think all the angel investors would kind of.
Yeah, but no,
that story.
that's the point I'm trying to make is what we need to do is to, because the guy who's going to a casino, there's a reason why he's going to a casino.
Yeah.
Because the casino has made it sexy. The casino is not going out there saying, hey, I'm going to give you a brilliant return. The casino is not saying that. The casino is saying, you can have the time of your life. Come here, and we're going to make it easy for you to have the time of your life. And I think that that's what we need to do in Zimbabwe. We need to build a startup culture that is sexy, that really tells you that, you know what, this is going to be the time of your life. We may lose your money. In fact, it's highly probable we're going to lose your money, but you want to have this fun. You want to be part of this. Because once you do that, then I think we will get traction. Because one or two will be successful.
The capital which allows for fun, I think, is important. And the reason we talk about it is actually not to complain that the people with money are not extending.
True.
Because to be fair, it's their money.
Yeah.
They get to do whatever they want.
No one is entitled to anything.
True.
But the broader conversation is the implications if we look at Zimbabwe maybe 10, 20 years down the line. There is no way we are competitive if we are not investing in things which change the cycle. At the moment, if you look at where money goes, and this is more speaking to from an economic perspective, if institutional investors are making a decision to place money, let's say it's a pension fund, and they say, you know what, I have an option. Do I put part of my portfolio in this very risky opportunity for $500,000, or I put in this very safe opportunity for $500,000? Most of them are choosing the very safe, and admittedly so. But I think I would like to just maybe throw it out there to say, surely there is entrepreneurs, and I guess it's also the job of the entrepreneur to make noise, because no one is coming to fetch you from the dormitory and say, hey, look,
that's really what I'm saying.
But I'm saying it takes two to tango. So even if they come to make noise, and I think we don't need many people to be conscious of it. We need few, because if there is success stories, then the defensive, because remember, some of these defensive ones actually were the entrepreneurs in the day. So if we look at, for example, the banking ecosystem a few years ago, not a few, like perhaps 2-3 decades ago.
Or Econet.
Yeah, or Econet. A bunch of highly ambitious, they had the tenacity to go through the process. And I think the challenge at the moment is that because a lot of wealth at an individual level was decimated by inflation, I don't know whether to call it
but
confidence.
I think if we want to disrupt, we shouldn't look at that kind of capital.
No, we shouldn't. But the reason we raise it is because you can't fix a problem you don't know. And I think it's very important to be clear what the problem is. In my opinion, the problem is that there is not enough capacity at an individual level to participate on the risk space.
Well, if I can have the last word on that. And from a Zimbabwean perspective, the thing is, I believe entrepreneurs, the individuals who eventually succeed in that space, one of their personality traits or qualities is that they're rebellious. And I think it's just much much easier for an ambitious young entrepreneur or an entrepreneur of any age who feels really passionately about something to get on a plane and do it somewhere where it's easier.
I think that's where I differ. I think that is true of business in general, but that is not true of entrepreneurs. Because the thing about entrepreneurs, and if you read deep into what Schumpeter says, is the harder it is, the more resilient they become, the more they actually want to solve the problem. The more complex it is, the more they actually want to deal with that complexity. So they're not living on a plane. But I do agree, the managerial class will live on a plane, will jump on a plane and leave the country. But I think that the entrepreneurial class, I think that one, they haven't found an ecosystem of the similar people where they're like, wow, these are my kindred spirits. This is exactly what I was looking for. That's number one. Number two, they do need fuel. They need
capital. And it's just,
but it's a misalignment of capital, because that guy has to now wear a suit to then convince these men with money because they are looking for a certain alpha, they're looking for a certain demeanor, they're looking for a certain way in which it's been like that for the last 50 or 100 years. So if we are to turn it upside down, we don't complain about the country, we don't complain about the state of the economy, and we now believe that there is actually an opportunity. But what we need to do is to perhaps find that capital that likes the ride of a lifetime. You know, there are people who will put money in a footballing team, right? That's money down a drain. They're losing it, but they're okay with it because you know what? The football team makes it necessary to make the team sexy. Right? That's what we don't do as entrepreneurs. What we don't do as entrepreneurs is we need to embrace failure and we need to make it acceptable in our society. Hey,
not just acceptable, sexy.
Sexy. You know, it has to be enticing. It has to be like, you know what? Right now, I'm betting on this, but I need a visa. And they're willing to put in their money there. And that's down the drain.
So you know what's interesting? If we go back to the accelerator, remember, when we're having this conversation, we're actually trying to find a long-term solution for Zimbabwe. Because ultimately, this is where, if Zim works, we're all happy. That's why we're here. So one of the key things is money being actively open to people. So the accelerator is an example. They actually put out a call. Now, do you realize that that's money coming to us? I'm saying that a lot can be expected from the entrepreneur, but it's interesting how when money actually makes a conscious decision to go and find ideas. So I wouldn't.
Then the ideas will come.
Then the ideas actually come because there are people who are there. They have these ideas, but sometimes because the money has not made a conscious communication that look, I'm looking to put in money for this. We applied to Cape Town. Why am I going to Cape Town? I would be very happy to do.
But
I'll be very happy to do it.
I differ slightly. I think that in Hollywood, it's the script writer goes to the producer. So you have to write a sexy story first.
Can I ask?
And then you go out there and you look for.
But Tinashe, in the case of Startup Bootcamp, they're coming the first time to Africa. It's not as if any of us, the startups who ended up, are the ones who brought them. Do you see?
Yeah. No. I hear you. You do make a point. Perhaps it's necessary. You know, we covered 20% of what we were supposed to cover. But
So
I think it's because
we'll have you back again. Sure.
We need to continue this conversation and actually just get an ecosystem going. And I'm trying to. What we're trying to do is get as many people as possible who are interested in ideas. Yes, the idea of making profit and making money is there, but there's this enticing idea of the ride of a lifetime, that you're with a group of people that will give you the most excitement you've ever seen in your life, and what they need is a few dollars from you, and you partake in that exciting journey. And I think that's why, for example, lots of people are investing in Bitcoin and, cryptocurrency. It's not necessarily because they believe in cryptocurrency, but they like that idea of a ride of a lifetime. Please, audience, tell us what you guys think. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Faro? Do you agree with Caleb? Who do you disagree with? But let's have your ideas and let's see how we can build this. What we're saying is whatever we've been doing has clearly failed, and we need to turn the model upside down. But how do we do that? Right? That's the question. And that means that you have to come here again. But I thoroughly enjoyed this, eh?
Yes, good fun.
No, thank you guys for having me. Interesting ideas, and I think ultimately, if we can get, no one is coming to save us as Zimbabwe. I think it's some clarity which needs to be in everyone. It's actually our responsibility to fix us, and no one is coming, and no one should. But I think as long as we don't actively take that responsibility, you will see that the bad money comes to Zim. So money which is very expensive, money which has very ill intentions, but it's not their fault. It's our inability to kind of showcase our ideas in front of the group. Yeah.
Thank you. Have yourself a wonderful weekend and Friday, and we are terribly sorry for the late start. Clearly, we need somebody who is high in conscientious in our team who can get us to start at 3.
Yes, well, it's Zia's fault.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.